Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever, whichever part of the world you people are joining. We're just waiting for 1-2 more minutes and we will start the session. So please bear with us.
So I was saying I already have some questions posted in over. I'm not sure if you guys are capturing this, but speakers, Diana and Majid, if you can already look at them and see if you have, you can prime yourselves to answer some of this. That would be.
Dio, we will try to post it in Zoom so that the over questions may not be visible to all the participants, all speakers. So we'll post it in this group so that the relevant speakers can address it.
Okay.
Live already.
We will start the session. Good morning again. Good morning or good afternoon and good evening for some of the participants joining from the Pacific region. If you're all here. My name is Imani Kumar. I'm the lead director with the ALP Forum, Asia LEDS Partnership Forum, and also the regional director with ICLEI South Asia and Deputy Secretary General with ICLEI Asia Pacific region. Welcome to the second week of ALP Forum. We had a very good and long discussions last week in the first week of the ALP Forum. And we also have this week and next week, the ALP Forum continues, ALP Forum 2021. On behalf of ALP, I just want to welcome all the participants and also our esteemed speakers and the moderator for this particular session, the long-term low-emission development strategies, LEDS and green recovery. Which is very much the topic at this time because on both ends, both on the pandemic and COVID-19 and also on the climate change front, we were looking like which is important or which is higher than the other one. But in my opinion, I will say a long-term strategy for climate change as well as green recovery because of the pandemic. Both are very much important. And I'm happy that we are discussing right now with the esteemed speakers on that. This session is recording, so I hope everyone is given consent to that. And maybe before I hand it over to the speakers and the moderator, few housekeeping rules. As I request everyone to please keep your mobile or messaging chat apps during this session because I think we have very much important session going on. The session will follow in the English language, but we also have interpretation available for Bahasa Indonesia. And participants are requested to send your questions through Q&A box. I hope everyone can see that Q&A box in that. And we will try to, and I request moderator maybe to try to take up those questions during the session. Let us make it more interactive between the speakers as well as with the participants. And I also request all the speakers to mute your mics because whenever you are speaking, you can open it up. And we also request everyone, if it is okay, to please keep your video sound so that we can have, I know that it's a virtual session. We could not meet face to face, but if you can keep your videos on, that will be helpful for us. We also have OVA platform. So please, whoever is joining from OVA platform, please click add the session to your choice in your agenda on the app, and you can see view the session on that. So these are the few housekeeping rules. I hope everyone will follow these ones. And may I have the next slide, please? This is the session today. I have Mr. Dio Gabinet, is the regional manager, NDC Partnership Support Unit from RCC Bangkok, is going to moderate the session. And I will ask him to maybe introduce all the speakers before I hand it over to them. Just to introduce Mr. Dio Gabinet, as I said, he's the regional manager for the NDC Partnership Support Unit based in UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center in Bangkok in Thailand. He coordinates the implementation of the partnership's activities related to all the stages of the country engagement and knowledge strategies in Eastern Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. Before joining the support unit, he also served as a liaison for the Climate Technology Center and Network, CTCN, and he coordinated CTCN's technical assistance, capacity building, and networking activities for Asia Pacific countries. He also led the climate and disaster resilience program of the FAO in the Philippines and supported the development management of the country's offices project portfolio on the disaster risk reduction and management and climate change on that. And we are so happy Mr. Dio Gabinet is with us today. And thank you for taking your time, Mr. Dio, and joining us for this session. So with this opening remarks, once again, I welcome all the speakers and the moderator and the participants. And the floor is, I just want to hand it over to Mr. Dio on that. Mr. Dio, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Kumar, for the very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome again our speakers and participants to the Asia LEDS Forum session on long-term low-emission development strategies, or LEDS, and green recovery. On behalf of the NDC partnership, I'd like to thank Mr. Kumar and the Asia LEDS partnership team for the opportunity to moderate this very interesting and very timely discussion on how the development community are supporting governments in the region and around the world in the preparation of their long-term strategies, and at the same time advocating and supporting the alignment of those strategies with the country's green recovery plans and measures. Around the first wave of the pandemic last year, if I could recall it correctly, it's around May or June, probably May, the NDC partnership asked its member countries how the pandemic will be affecting or will affect local and global climate action, both at the near term also and the long term. Specifically in how this will affect their achievement of the Paris Agreement. We sent this survey to all of our member countries, 114 of them, and we received around 65 responses during that time. And the survey revealed 3 near-term consequences that we really recommend that we should start taking measures to counteract. Around the time, the pandemic was really at the center of the political attention, and there was this fear, at least, which is quite founded, that it will be diverted away from climate focus, because a lot of the political attention will be more put towards the recovery and rehabilitation of as well as the public health concerns of the countries. And it's still the challenges that we have until today. And second, the allocation of public financial resources will be, of course, be geared towards COVID-19 response and economic stimulus, and it will divert more, not just political attention, but resources away from climate action. And not just the countries, but development organizations will also have reduced capacities to support climate actions. And it's not just because of resources diverted, but also the challenges that the pandemic imposed upon travel and restrictions towards the common, one of the most common tools that we use within development community is really to organize stakeholder consultations, meetings, to make sure that inputs coming from different stakeholders, particularly those that are vulnerable, are recognized, especially in the development of NDCs and other development-related frameworks. And this is really particularly challenging for a lot of us working in the development community. And these three near-term consequences that we have identified, this has profound consequences, but this is perfectly understandable, of course. But at the same time, they also provide a unique opportunity for development partners to help countries in designing and enacting comprehensive measures to mainstream and climate action hand in hand together with the economic recovery plans and measures that the countries are preparing or already undertaking during that time, or until this time actually. It is the first time since the adoption of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals that long-term socioeconomic development needs have so profoundly and naturally aligned with our urgent, also very urgent climate needs. And on that note, I'm very delighted today to be moderating this session and to be joined with colleagues working also in the region who will be highlighting recent developments and efforts of countries around the world on long-term and low emission development strategies, or LTLEDs. So I'll just be referring it as LTLEDs from now on, and green recovery, along with successful governance and implementation models. And they will also, of course, be providing some examples on their work. The session will also present an overview on the cleaner recovery action plans and their implementation in the post-pandemic regime. So before we start, before we dive into our speaker presentations, I'd like to give the floor first to Ms. Hannah Motoni Ryder, who will be sharing with us a regional overview for this session's topic. Ms. Ryder is a regional climate change consultant for UNESCO's Environment and Development Division. She is a dual Kenyan and British national with close to 20 years of hands-on research and policy experience on economic growth and sustainable development in the private sector, as well as in the UN and in the government, including advising projects in China, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Indonesia, and South Korea. Ms. Ryder, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, dear participants. Thank you so much, Mr. Gabinete, for the introduction, and also to Mr. Kumar and colleagues, the organizer of this forum. It is my pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much. We are here, UNESCAP, today presenting research which was initiated by the Environment and Development Division. The work was released in December 2020. I will be giving you a short overview of that, and also to note that this year we're building on this work, including working with other agencies on some new analysis, in particular with UN Women and UNEP, which helps us to delve into these topics and understand the challenges and the opportunities that countries in the Asia-Pacific region are really taking. And the aim of my presentation today is really to look at how green is the Asia-Pacific recovery and what are the opportunities for alignment with NDCs. And we in ESCAP didn't just take a very kind of theoretical approach. we have been looking at this in really practical terms. What are countries actually doing? So that's what I'd like to present to you today. In terms of the aim of this analysis, I'll just begin with that. The key question of our discussion today, in many ways, is really is this overlap I'm showing you here. The overlap between what countries are doing in terms of NDCs, their adaptation and mitigation actions, or what they're planning to do through their NDCs. What are the needs in terms of poverty reduction and the pandemic, COVID-19 mitigation actions? And the closer we can get with all of these actions, the better. I think as development professionals, in theory, that's what we're hoping. And so what we were trying to do with this analysis is to understand in 2020, what was the overlap? And where we did see an overlap, how useful can that be to share with other countries? How useful can it be for other countries to use in the region and move on? So we used two different types of analysis to understand this overlap. The first analysis was to look at it in financial terms. So looking at, to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, we knew that many countries are and are still diverting a lot of fiscal resources to try to save people's lives and to support the economic sector. The question was, how green was this spending? How green was the fiscal response? Well, we estimated, and other colleagues in ESCAP estimated this, that ESCAP region spent a total of over $5,521 billion to address COVID-19 in 2020. It's approximately 7% of the region's GDP. But only 15 of the ESCAP countries provided these kinds of estimates in their NDCs. And those actions, the actions of spending on climate action costs, actually summed to 1,261 billion, which were fairly comparable to the costs for those countries themselves of COVID-19 action. So it suggests that the financial ambition, actually, if we're thinking about what does it take, if we're really trying to envision what does it take to address climate change financially, the kinds of costs that we're looking at for COVID-19 may well give us an idea of what those kinds of the kind of ambition, every yearly costs that we need to be thinking about in the region and that we need to be spending in the region. But that caveat, that kind of overarching point aside, actually for only one of the ESCAP countries, Singapore, did we find, and we can go to the next slide now, did we find that the COVID-19 spending was larger than the total climate change financing forecast. So for six of the other countries that had the estimates, the COVID-19 spending could not even cover the costs that were estimated for adaptation or mitigation. So again, it gives you an idea of the scale. Climate change and adaptation mitigation costs in this region are predicted effectively to be significantly higher and deeper than COVID-19 costs. So this is the first aspect to realize that a green recovery is more, and climate change action is even more than COVID-19. And we found that this is actually even more of a challenge in the poorer, in the relatively poorer Asia-Pacific countries. Those ones that have taken strong fiscal responses have had more resources. So the ones who have been most constrained have been constrained by their GDP, yet we know that climate change costs will fall hardest on the poorest people and the poorest countries in the world. So this was the number one finding, And the second finding now goes into more of the specific policies which were taking place. So we'll move to the next analysis. What we did here was to now go into what the COVID-19 responses actually looked like. What were they? And how did they overlap with actions in NDCs that are set out in NDCs? So if you look here, this sets out, for example, the COVID-19 response. There's lots of social security nets which were created. There was spending in terms of more increased social services and so on, income protection for employees, etc. And in NDCs, on the other hand, most NDCs are separated out. We can move to the next slide. Most NDCs are separated out into 6 different sectors. And so we asked, what is the overlap between what the COVID-19 actions are in terms of social security, social protection, income protection, etc., and also these sectors? And the result was very fascinating. Next slide. We found 111 measures which were introduced since COVID-19 began, 58% of which actually overlapped with what were in the NDCs already. So what we call the sweet spot measures, the ones that kind of fit into that circle, into the center of that circle. And then we found another set which were entirely new and were not in NDCs, but these were COVID-19 actions which could be classified, and we classified them as green, climate change related. And then a further category of actions or commitments which we saw in the NDCs, which could be applicable to support the COVID-19 response, but had not been introduced so far. And we'll come back to why those hadn't been introduced. I think it's a very interesting question, why not? But going back to the ones that were introduced, what sectors were they introduced in? Well, first of all, majority were, not surprisingly, disaster risk management related. That one, 16 new measures. And as you can see, also the energy sector had significant new measures. At the same time, there were a number of Asia-Pacific countries which didn't have any green recovery policies for the energy sector. 15, we found, didn't have any of these policies for the energy sector, although that sector does, for example, account for the majority of carbon emissions for most countries in the region. And there were many countries, we had 29 countries that had highly relevant policies in their NDCs on land use and agriculture, but again, were not necessarily implementing them. So it was very interesting to see that the action is very varied, especially across the different sectors. But it was possible, it was happening. Looking also at the country level, we also saw that certain countries were ahead of others. So there was one country, for example, only one country in the entire region that used the COVID-19 opportunity to bring in new policy actions in all of the different sectors. But 5 of those, that country, New Zealand, those 6 policies, 5 of them were entirely new. They weren't already in the NDCs. They were just created. So again, this question of why weren't they in the NDCs? On the other hand, there were 19 countries which just introduced 1 or less new policies, half of which were not in NDCs. And again, we found that many of these countries were low income or least developed countries. Suggesting that there were some significant constraints in terms of the overall fiscal response and their ability to make different make these positive choices. We also found that the largest emissions in the region, India, China, Japan, all seem to be taking some degree of action, which is important to recognize as well. So let me just give you some. So what does it mean? Well, it is impossible to categorically set out why most Asian and Pacific countries are not yet fully aligning green, the pro-poor COVID-19 recovery policies. But this analysis still provides some insights into why and what can be done in order to increase the potential for that. And what we did in order to understand that, we categorized 4 different countries, 4 different types of countries. So there's the fact that they haven't implemented new COVID-19 policies, that they haven't implemented, and that their NDCs are constrained. This suggests a significant lack of financing or governmental will to take action. Those others who have implemented new COVID-19 policies, which were not in NDCs, maybe it indicates that they had previously lacked climate ambition or even an understanding of the urgency of climate action. And so these countries are countries which could do more and share experience to spur others in the region to act more. And we felt, given the gaps, especially energy, air transport, tourism sectors, clearly ideas are very lacking in terms of what can be done in those sectors. And then for others, the fact that they did have NDC policies which could be used as COVID-19 response measures, but those hadn't happened, indicates that perhaps those in charge of the NDC policies have perhaps designed them not with others involved, perhaps not enough mainstreaming, not enough deeper consultation with sector leads or the central strategic planning offices. And this really does seem to be the case, especially for the forestry sector commitments, but also transport sector to some degree seems to face this kind of challenge. So what have we been doing in 2021 to follow that up? Well, of course, we've been engaging with different countries, and of course, forums like this are very, very useful, and I'm going to be finishing very soon. But it's been really important for us to engage, to discuss these findings, and to encourage countries to continue to move on this path. And in particular, we have been doing even more analysis to review and assess the NDCs, because if the NDCs are not ambitious enough, this again puts a constraint in terms of the green recovery and the potential for a green recovery. So I'm not going to review the analysis, share the analysis that we've been doing in 2021 in depth, and my colleague Aneta Nikolova presented that in plenary 1, where we're looking at how can we raise climate ambition and also strengthen, for example, what countries are the enabling factors that countries have, climate financing, preparation, the mainstreaming, the coordination, which will all create the space for a stronger green recovery as well. We found that, and in particular, again, this report will be coming out very soon. We find that it's a great deal of Asia Pacific countries, and especially over the last year or so, have really deepened the opportunity in terms of creating the enabling factors, being ready to mainstream, doing more in terms of the coordination. But now it's the time to raise the ambition, and that can, and the report from 2020 suggests that this can be in line with a green recovery and COVID-19 response. So finally, we have 3 next steps which we're planning. We're looking at, and let me start, that's not showing very, let me start really with what is very important, and at the country level, we believe, given the work that we've done, this report sets out in 2020. The report sets out potential green resilient actions. At COP 26, there's a real opportunity for countries to increase climate ambition, and we're hoping that this will really happen, and that we will this kind of information will help countries to do exactly that. We'll continue to be supporting and providing the capacity building to strengthen ambition, to strengthen the green recovery, especially because COVID-19 does not seem to be going away, but in particular through regional cooperation, and to obviously continue to study the data and the trends. In the report for the 2020 report, and also the forthcoming report, you will find many leading examples. Countries at all stages of development, they can inspire each other, both on the green recovery and both in terms of NDC and ambition. So we have examples of energy policy in China, transport policy in the Philippines, tourism policy in Palau, agriculture and land policy in Kazakhstan, water policy in Afghanistan, the disaster risk management in Myanmar. All of these are areas that countries can exchange information on. These are great examples of where green recovery has been put into action, and we hope that other countries can work together and share these examples and do even more. And that is it from me, and I look forward to discussing with others what this real potential is and how we can do even more together going forwards. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this overview of where the Asia Pacific region is.
Thanks, Ms. Ryder, for sharing that study, the results of the study that you did with UNESCO, especially, and finding the right sweet spot between green recovery and green growth measures. I mean, they call this there's just really so many overlapping mutually beneficial measures which are low-hanging that both the development community and also countries can really look into based on the assessments that you have, based on the result of your study, and that the cost of inaction, even in midst of the pandemic, will really have this heavy toll on our socioeconomic fabric, whether it's monetary or otherwise. And you're right. I mean, there still needs to be further assessment on this and how we are doing in terms of delivering support, how we can deliver even further support even during the pandemic or similar crisis in the future. And there definitely needs to be a post-mortem assessment after all of this. Thanks again, Ms. Ryder. So with that, we'll now move on with our speaker presentations, and we'll start with my presentation on the NDC Partnerships Economic Advisory Initiative for Green Recovery Plans and Packages, and then we'll move on with we'll move to the presentation from GGI and then WRI, and last but not least from Climate Analytics. So for each and every presentation, I'll be introducing the speaker first before you present. And for the audience, again, let me just repeat what Mr. Kumar said. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, or for anyone in the panel, please post them on the Q&A board of the Whova application, or you can also drop them in the chat box or the Q&A box. And if time permits, we can also give you the floor during the Q&A session. You just need to click the raise hand function, which you can find at the bottom of your screens, so I can acknowledge you and give you the floor. So as I've said, after the presentations, we will be having a moderated discussion and Q&A, where I'll be posing the questions that you have raised, as well as some of the follow-up questions that I may have. So without further ado, we'll start with the next speaker, which doesn't need any introduction, because that's me. All right. Okay, can I share my own screen, or?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I
Yes,
don't see the function.
you can share.
No, I don't see the function anywhere on the Zoom application. Maybe in the interest of time. Let me
Maybe I
see.
can share and then.
Yeah, I think that would be that would be better. I'll just prompt you if you have to move on to the next slide.
I have given the remote control also to you.
Oh, all right. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's start with the presentation. Can I move into the next slide, please? Oh, how do we do this? All right. Okay, that looks good. So good afternoon. It's already good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Diego Manda, and in behalf of the NDC Partnership Support Unit, which the division where I belong to, I'd like to thank again the organizers of this this forum, Asia-LEDS Partnership, for allowing us to share our insights and also the initiative that we have, especially on our thoughts on how countries are forced to rethink their national economic growth strategies and how the partnership and its members are trying to help ministries of finance and planning around the world to integrate climate actions in their recovery planning. The global pandemic and its health, economic and societal impacts have brought a new layer of complexity to our urgent need for climate action. Countries are forced to rethink their national economic growth strategies as resources are shifted to strengthening health systems, promoting business recovery, and restoring the lives of those who were affected, which is essentially everyone. In response, the NDC Partnership is working to deploy economic advisory support to ministries of finance and planning to integrate climate actions in their recovery planning. And in this presentation, I will be sharing the partnership's delivery model for deploying embedded advisors in finance and planning ministries, the types of advisory support made available in the past 2 years, as well as some of the preliminary results that we had. So just a very quick overview of what I will be presenting. So I'll be doing a very quick introduction of what the NDC Partnership is for those who are not familiar with the partnership, before I walk you through the economic advisory initiative that we have and share insights on the common challenges that we saw on the ground and how we can keep this momentum for climate action going. Oh, all right. So the NDC Partnership, as our name implies, is, as of today, is a global coalition of 114 developed and developing member countries and around 82 institutions composed of regional development banks and other IFIs, UN agencies, think tanks, and international NGOs. This, of course, includes the organizations of our panelists here, UNESCO, Triple GI, Climate Analytics, and ICLEI. All together collaborating to drive transformational climate action while enhancing sustainable development. The partnership is actively engaged in 72 countries now, and a lot of them, around 20 of them, in the Asia Pacific region. Our members, our developed member and donor and organizational members work directly with national governments, international institutions, CSOs, researchers, and private sector to support our member countries in enhancing their ambitions and also in accelerating the implementation of their adaptation and mitigation commitments as they are enshrined in their NDCs. We support countries to plan and mobilize much needed resources to implement their NDCs by leveraging support from development partners and developed member country members, and also by increasing the visibility and access and responsiveness to their NDC support programs. And this includes the NDC implementation plans, action plans, and roadmaps that countries have been developing in the past few years. Our longer-term vision, of course, is to create coherence and alignment between climate and development agenda, which allows for stronger political buy-in and momentum that would foster to what we all aspire for, which is transformational change. And nowhere in time is that vision open to both risks and opportunities than what we are experiencing now, when countries around the world are mobilizing to jumpstart their economies from from COVID-19. So in response to, as I've said, the survey that we have conducted early last year with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, the NDC Partnership launched the Economic Advisor Initiative in June 2020. This is initiative aimed to support governments in preparing climate-compatible recovery packages by embedding economic advisors into the Ministries of Finance and/or Planning. We are very grateful to the support that our 13 partners here, whose logos and flags you can see on the screen, that provided to the initiative. We have so far completed the support delivered by 11 advisors in 8 countries and have mobilized, deployed 42 advisors in over 30 countries. This support has highlighted the growing recognition among ministries of finance, among countries, that climate action requires the leadership and on a whole of government approach, not just in the ministries of environment or climate change coordination agencies, where all of this talk about climate action is mostly happening well in the past. But it also needs to come from related sectoral ministries such as energy, ministries of energy, transport, forestry. The initiative has also shown that such support is vital for strong and sustained economic growth, to reach greater benefits, especially in terms of the projects that the support that we're mobilizing with regards to infrastructure investments, creation of green jobs, and in addition, the supporting climate action and NDC implementation. As I've said, the advisory support is underway, and these are just three of the broad areas where exciting progress is being made. And these are the national planning and budgeting, project pipelines preparation, and climate finance. And as you can see on the screen, I provide here at least some 8 examples from different countries in terms of how this economic advisory support is being mobilized and how they are supporting countries in terms of planning and budgeting, preparation of projects, as well as enhancing their climate finance infrastructure in the country. So for example, in Indonesia, the team of advisors there deployed through support of World Bank, GIZ, and WRI will have developed low carbon economic stimulus roadmap with recommendations and implementation plans that covers 3 major sectors: waste, energy, and agriculture, which is mostly in the form of cash crops. And we are hoping, of course, because they are working closely with Bappenas, which is the planning ministry in Indonesia, that they will be considered eventually in the national budget process for 2022 to 2023. In Albania, the advisor that was deployed there has screened around 400 projects with potential climate impact to their MTDP, their medium-term budgeting framework, and which will eventually inform the development, the preparation of the public expenditure management selection criteria that this particular advisor is also supporting to prepare. In Jordan, more than 100 potential green recovery actions has been identified by the advisors, and this will be informing the finalization of a new $500 million loan from the World Bank Program for Results project. In Eswatini, they have been preparing, they prepared 5 projects already, including 2 technical assistance projects on NDC and NDP, National Development Program alignment and climate risk assessments, along with 3 green investment projects supporting eco-industrial park development, LPG production, and ethanol fuel blending, which have already identified partners as we speak. In the area of climate finance, Zimbabwe is developing a resource mobilization plan for green economic recovery, which will be aligned with their SDG targets. And this already includes identified potential resources for financing this climate change investments that the country can potentially access. So apart from the progress that we have made so far to the help of the economic advisors deployed on the ground, we have also observed 3 emerging themes that are coming out from the support and also from the requests, from the needs of the countries that were expressed to the advisors, and also the types of the support that they are deploying. And these are social inclusion, sustainable procurement, and digital economy. So in terms of social equity and inclusion, we are seeing more actions that support women-oriented, women-owned, women-oriented enterprises in green and blue economy sectors such as agriculture and fisheries. Also, they're supporting vulnerable stakeholders and special needs, special stakeholders to increase their access or ability to access finance for energy efficiency technologies, which is, as I've said, primarily for women and low-income households. And we're also seeing, more attention towards empowering women and to help them transition to LPG, especially for household cooking. Some advisors are also working with countries on emerging opportunities on digital economy. For example, the one that sorry, I forgot to move to the next slide. The one that I'm showing here is an example from Albania, where the advisor is focusing on potential interventions that will help strengthen their digital infrastructure, as well as upgrade their educational skills program to make it more compatible with the 5th industrial revolution that everyone seems to be talking about. And also in some countries, there are interventions where they are really recommending the move for the digitalization of just the database or the monitoring system that the country has. And this is really critical, especially in monitoring and tracking our progress towards our SDGs. And beyond that, of course, there's also the digitalization of the different systems, infrastructure systems that we have related to energy. And of course, and this could have more help us achieve better headways in terms of really installing smart grids and intelligent transport systems, and of course will substantially help in developing early warning systems for the country if the skill and the technology are transferred properly in that country. And in terms of sustainable government procurement, some countries, such as Eswatini, they are proposing recommendations to update their public procurement system, including their regulations, to strengthen the inclusion of climate change assessments and commitments. And this includes the conduct of vulnerability assessments as part of their feasibility studies, as requirements for approving the public bidding process. So this is practically the climate risk screening that a lot of IFIs are trying to promote and advocate and also support. Now, in terms of common challenges that we are seeing on the ground, we note that to help governments to address these challenges, who are already facing limited fiscal space and resource mobilization to implement their green recovery responses, advisors are targeting their recommendations towards the implementation of these interventions to be included in the subsequent budgeting cycles and forthcoming NDC action plans, so they can have more attention in terms of resources, whether it's internal or external, coming from ODA or from development partners. Second is that to mitigate ongoing health-related risks and challenges, international travel restrictions on gathering for in-person meetings were severely restricted, as you are already you have probably experienced, and countries are really trying to tack in different approaches, including pairing national advisors with international advisors, as well as coordinating closely with in-country partners who are readily available and have better access to the national counterparts in the government. And finally, although climate action is increasingly being viewed as a national priority in most countries, it still requires a whole of government approach. and it needs to be sustained with a longer-term engagement and longer-term horizon planning in mind, especially when dealing with ministries of finance and planning. Advisors in some countries mentioned challenges that the climate action are not yet being mainstreamed in the way that that gender has in the past 10 years, and that public perceptions of greening is recoveries is not really, not really just seen or perceived as important, and this have manifested due to various reasons, and one in particular is of course political constraints, such as a blocking of blocking the passage of substantial green fiscal reforms. And one of the last message that on behalf of the partnership that would like to get across to everyone here in this panel discussion would be we still need to keep the political focus on climate change going on, even amidst the pandemic. We must ensure that even at this moment of this crisis that we are delivering strong international leadership, and we need to provide consistent, coherent, high-level messaging, and that responses and events related to this needs to be publicized and aimed at keeping political attention on climate action, NDCs, or long-term strategies that countries are embarking to implement in the coming months or years. And we must recognize also the evolving needs of countries and support the alignment of their climate and COVID response measures when and if possible. And this requires continuous engagement with countries, of course, to understand their existing needs and allow us to deploy adequate support in these very, very complicated times. So I end my presentation here now as we move to the next presenter. Sorry. So our next presenter is Mr. Deepak Krishnan. Mr. Krishnan is the associate, Diana. So our next presenter, sorry about that, my apologies, is Ms. Diana Alejandra Quesada, who is a Green Recovery Lead in the Green Growth Institute's Climate Action and Inclusive Development Unit, based in Seoul, South Korea. In this role, Diana is responsible for leading the research and analysis activities on green recovery, as well as providing technical inputs for green recovery bankable projects. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you. So good morning, good evening, everyone. Today, I'm going to briefly present to you some of GGI's experiences in simultaneously developing long-term strategies and green recovery strategies in the same countries, and how we try to align those two tasks so they can have an actual impact together. Based on the learnings that we have acquired from those experiences, I will explain to you how to ensure that the long-term strategies that we are developing can be useful for guiding the green recovery. And I will explain through specific actions that we can take along the full process of developing the LEDS strategies. So I will give some tangible examples as much as possible. Next slide, please. So GGI, along with other partners and development agencies, provide ongoing technical support to at least 9 of its members for the development and implementations of long-term development strategies. The challenge now has increased because we now have to support those countries also in the development and implementation of their medium and long-term green recovery strategies. And so we have to align both types of supports from these two fronts, green recovery and LEDS. We want to make sure that these policies are aligned and they are guided by all the national priorities, so we can make like a tangible process on both fronts. To achieve this alignment, GGI supports these countries in a range of activities, trying to cover like the full value chain of NDCs enhancement. First of all, we support long-term strategies. We quantify the socioeconomic co-benefits of those strategies. We revised their NDCs and enhance their ambition, trying to enhance their ambition. We support their NDC implementation through attracting investment and investment plans. And finally, we also support the developing MRV and transparency systems in all these countries. And the previous one, please. So one example of the countries that we're working on these fronts is Hungary. In Hungary, last year, we supported the development of the long-term national clean strategy, aiming to achieve the climate neutrality of Hungary by 2050. And this year, we are assessing Hungary's LTS scenarios to match the scenarios of implementing the European Green Recovery. So we are trying to align both strategies as much as possible and to see on their specific scenarios what will happen if we achieve a green recovery and these long-term mitigation and adaptation targets. So on these exercises, we have observed that we see two types of countries. The first type is countries that have already developed these long-term strategies. So the long-term planning can actually inform their green recovery plans and guide the implementation of the green recovery measures. And this is the case, for example, of Fiji, which published its LTS around 2019. So most national priorities in terms of mitigation have already been there. And right now, their green recovery measures are already being considered within their 2021 budget, for example. So they somehow have already considered the long-term targets along with their recovery targets. And on the other spectrum, we have countries that implemented their green recovery measures and plans before they developed their LTS strategies. So actually, we now have to consider those measures and those recovery policies into the models for developing the LTS strategies to see how this can affect these cases. And this is a case, for example, for Burkina Faso, where we started developing the LEDS just this year, and simultaneously we are developing a green recovery assessment study to see how well they are doing with their green recovery and which policies they have to implement. So the next one, how exactly can we make this alignment? How can we make sure that the green recovery perspective is considered along the process of developing long-term strategies? Next one, please. So here is a picture of the full process that GGI follows in order to develop a long-term strategy. And as you know, this process aims to strengthen the dialogue and governance processes to building the government's capacity to implement the long-term climate targets, as well as the economic development targets. And it is important to consider green recovery on all these steps. However, there are 3 critical steps within this 6-step process where we have to consider green recovery aspects so we can get the most impact to it. Those 3 steps are basically developing the scenarios for the long-term strategies, prioritizing the actions, and then on the implementation. So we can align, for example, the implementation of both climate objectives and recovery objectives. So I will explain each step in detail. The next one, please. Thank you. So in the first step, the scenario development stage of the LTDS, we normally develop scenarios based on science-informed modeling and on forward-looking targets. And we aim to capture the priorities of the countries, especially the priorities of LDCs and SIDS, which is to increase climate resilience aside from increasing mitigation. And they are focused more on adaptive capacities. And these adaptive capacities and resilience priorities are commonly linked with the SDGs. And green recovery targets and measures are also linked with the SDGs. So the way GGI uses approaches this problem, it's okay, if both targets are linked through the SDGs, how can we join, or which tools can we use to join these two under one single scenario? So we are using the Green Growth Index and its simulation tool to assess the SDG co-benefits of the policies under the different scenarios that we are assessing, the business as usual and the low emission scenario. Because green recovery aims to support and accelerate the achievement of the SDGs, the Green Growth Index and this simulation tool can be used to assess both green recovery and LEDS simultaneously or under the same exercise. Moreover, we use the green economic modeling to assess the impacts of different policies along the economies of the countries. And within this model, we also imputed the policies established by the economic recovery and all the COVID-19 economic measures that have been implemented in the country. So here we are already considering the COVID-19 implications in the long-term scenarios for each country. So an example of where we are doing here is Burkina Faso and Ethiopia, where we are just starting our assessment of LEDS, and we are just developing the scenarios, and we are already consider green economic modeling and the simulation tool to assess this in both countries. On the next step on prioritizing actions, so we know that the LEDS, the long-term scenarios, it's the overarching plan for achieving the NDCs and for increasing the ambition of climate neutrality. And we have noticed that green recovery plans that are highly aligned with the NDCs and make synergies with the economic development goals can drive a more ambitious climate action. So the alignment between these three concepts, it's very important and can drive actual impact to both. So how can we make sure we align green recovery with long-term strategies with NDCs? The key thing that we look here is the prioritized actions. In the LEDS, we normally prioritize the actions that have the highest abatement potential and that also have multiple economic development objectives. And we normally try to analyze this priority by synergies and trade-offs between actions and across policy objectives. So for our assessments on green recovery policies, we use the same principle. So which are the key sectors or key actions that will have the highest economic development goals and also can contribute to either climate mitigation or climate adaptation. And one of the key things that we look into it's the monitoring and evaluation systems in the country, basically because both actions, either in green recovery or long-term strategies, will have the same indicators to measure impact. So most likely the MRV and the MNE systems can be used to track the progress of both activities. And that's how we are trying to align the NDCs, SDGs, LEDS, and green recovery using the MRV system as a baseline. Next one. So finally, in the implementation stage of this whole process, we try to translate the NDCs and the national climate strategies into bankable projects that we can secure finance and ultimately increase public and private sector capital flows towards sustainability. In green recovery, it's basically the similar principle. One of the key barriers is attracting finance to be able to finance the green recovery measures. But we have noticed that the financial mechanisms and the financial plans that we use to finance the NDCs can be also utilized for financing green recovery. And an example of this, it's, for example, the use of sustainability bonds. In some countries, they are using sustainability bonds to finance NDCs and green recovery targets as well. We also notice that budgeting tracking tools are very useful for these purposes because some countries are already including their green recovery measures and efforts within their current budget. And those countries are also pursuing efforts towards green budgeting.
Hi, Diana. Sorry to interrupt here. Can you please wrap up so we can have some more time for discussion later? Thank you.
And finally, just to close up this, one of the key examples of this is our project in Tonga, where we actually help with the long-term strategy and the NDC enhancement program. And from here, we develop investment plans that can actually be implemented or useful for the green recovery measures. So those are the three key areas or approaches that we can utilize to make sure that long-term strategies can be useful for a green recovery. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. And I welcome any questions later.
Yes, there are certainly questions in the Q&A box which you can answer directly or maybe later during the Q&A session. So thanks again, Ms. Avila, for your presentation and for sharing the work that GGI is delivering across the world in terms of supporting countries in their LEDS and NDC process. Now participants, I now turn your attention to Mr. Deepak Krishnan. So Mr. Krishnan is the Associate Director for WRI India's Energy Program and leads their work on clean energy initiatives for different consumer categories and clean energy transitions and on water energy nexus. Prior to this, he also worked on energy consulting practices with PwC and Deloitte. Mr. Krishnan, over to you.
Thank you, Dio. I hope I'm audible to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Trust all of you are staying safe and healthy. As Dio mentioned, I'm with the energy program at the WRI India offices, and my contribution to this discussion is going to be a very quick global overview of the post-COVID recovery measures and a summary of where India stands and what, in our view, the country should continue to do. So next slide, please. So we have all gone through a hard time over the last 1.5 to 2 years, and the health concerns and bereavements apart, the economic devastation also has been, pretty cruel. As you can see that the extreme poverty, the gains of many decades have been reversed for a lot of people, and it's really heartbreaking to see that. So next slide, please. So, and as the economies have started to rebound, we have also seen that emissions have shot up. 2020, there was a lot of, rediscovery of wildlife within cities. People for example, in North India being able to see the Himalayas in the distant Himalayas, which they, usually cannot see. So all that apart, once the economies have started to recover, the emissions to have increased. So next slide, please. And we have a very interesting situation where both the leaders, as you can see in this slide, and the people, if you can please move to the next slide. The people across countries have also very strongly agreed that the government actions should prioritize climate change. And it's overwhelming if you see the light blue bars on the right. So before we get into what India did, let's do a quick summary of what have been the global recovery efforts. Next slide, please. So, in a global state of play, so the rich countries have dominated spending. It is a truth about the current economic prowess, which is unevenly spread across the globe. Next slide, please. And we have, and this shows you the imbalance between the advanced economies, emerging economies, and the local low-income developing countries. And if you can move to the next slide, please. And if you see that over the last few months, since the time economic packages have been announced, governments have learned, they have taken feedback from different expert organizations, some of whom spoke earlier. They have also taken feedback from the people, and as a result, we have seen that particularly if you look at energy in a particular snapshot, the clean energy commitments have started to increase, and across sectors too. This is seen that the green and clean quotient has been increasing. But this is a typical case of a few steps forward and a few steps back. So if we can move to the next slide. So if you see that there are the OECD has classified some of these spendings as positive, some of these announcements as mixed and negative, which actually correlate to the few steps back. And next slides, the next couple of slides will actually show you that across different sectors, we have different types of announcements spread across the sectors also, with maybe one or two exclusively being in the solely positive sort of thing. And if you can go to the next slide, it will show you country-wise what has been the component of the COVID stimulus that has been environmentally relevant. And if you can move to the next slide, please. This is also again a snapshot of how many countries have actually moved, from the time their packages were announced and to the latest data that is available as on February 2021. How the direction has been in terms of making more green investments compared to last year vis-a-vis today. But in summary, if you can move to the next slide, all the trackers, whoever they may have developed, they come to the only conclusion that the world isn't doing enough. And I think this is a point which Hannah, Dio, and Diana have brought up in their presentations. So if you can move to the next slide. We saw a snapshot of what is happening in India, and it's a similar story. And across sectors, again, you can see that which are the ones where clean and green initiatives are announced, which is where and which are the ones where regressive measures have been announced. So it's again a case of few steps forward, few steps back, as I mentioned earlier, where, for example, in a situation where you had critical infrastructure status accorded to renewables, at the same time we saw coal mines being opened up for competition, though a couple of states said that they didn't want that to happen. Similarly, solarization of agriculture has been announced and taken off in some of the states. But at the same time, we have had policies which removed the requirement for coal washing before transport to different regions. We have also seen the green hydrogen mission being announced. Some states also saying that they do not want, they do not foresee more coal in their mix and have actively started looking for pathways to a just transition. So with all this in mind, you can go to the next slide, please. What we did is picked up a few sectors where we have identified some of the measures that need to be taken. So WRI in its role, we see ourselves both as a think and do tank and respond to stakeholders depending on the need. So some of these suggestions would involve more research, some of these would involve more action, changes in policy. For example, in terms of rural electricity access, energy, as we all know, is a great enabler for SDGs, and particularly in rural areas. So steps like expansion of storage to complement whatever solar is coming up, while also complementing the grid expansion. Similarly, in the medium term, looking at reliability of grids, training for people so that the localites can avail of the job opportunities that are getting created because of these investments, and M&D, which is a particular weak point. Next slide, please. Similarly, in terms of the overall capacity planning, the distribution companies need a combination of capital infusion and discipline, which is what will make the sector vibrant and enable them to take on more renewable energy. Right now, a lot of renewable energy offtake is not happening because of their financial challenges. Similarly, move the country to a more of a market-based, merit order-based kind of scheduling where RE generation is prioritized. Next slide. Similarly, the first fuel, as we call energy efficiency, where linking housing schemes to the energy conservation code, implement a cooling action plan given the extent of heat waves that are going to increase, explore technology transfer. These are some of the measures that we have suggested. Next slide, please. And then moving on to other sectors, we also are looking at how to integrate transport with land use, having a unified transport authority so that these transport decisions are also seamless and facilitate more of public transport, having more transport-oriented development. Next slide, please. And look to green urban spaces, urban infrastructure, and sustainable development. A lot of cities have also signed up to what we call as cities for forests. And this is becoming a significant topic of interest across cities. We also are recommending that people's biodiversity registers be created so that when projects like metro rails come up, we know what kind of trees are being felled and what are the compensatory mechanisms that can be implemented. Next slide, please. And in urban transport, as I said, the critical thing would be to look at how do we support zero emission vehicles. So there is the conversation about electric vehicles, yes, but there is much more fundamental non-motorized transports that we need to look at and establish the primacy of public transport over private, even as we come out of COVID. So next slide. And while these are some of the areas where we have delved into deep, there are other important areas too, that is housing for urban poor. How do we also make this climate resilient, economically affordable, and also give them access to opportunities to take part in economic growth. And last but not the least, building adaptability against climate vulnerabilities. We have seen a number of cyclones and floods and heat waves. So I think this is a reality that we have to contend with, and building this adaptability within our infrastructure is also quite key. So I think that's all that we had. It's a vast topic, as Hannah also mentioned. Lots of sectors are getting covered. So thank you. Happy to take any questions later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krishnan, and thanks for presenting WRI's assessment on the global recovery, especially, and how developing and development countries are faring in terms of their green recovery efforts. So we now will move on to the last presenter, Mr. Manjit Dakal. Manjit is the head of the LDC support team at the Climate Analytics and serves as an advisory chair of the Least Developed Countries Group at the multilateral process of the UNCCC. He provides scientific, strategic, and high-level climate leadership and support to the LDCs in climate change and UN-related processes and implementation of in the implementation of the climate action. Manjit, over to you.
Thank you, Dio. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I don't think I have much time, so I'll directly jump to the presentation. I'll talk briefly about the work Climate Analytics is doing in a context of a green recovery.
Sorry, can you speak a bit louder or speak closer to your microphone?
Sure.
It's a bit muffled.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is it okay now?
Yeah, a bit better. Thanks.
Thank you. I will be reflecting briefly about the work that Climate Analytics is doing, broader in terms of the green recovery from the pandemic, and we'll try to focus, bring down some of the work that we have done at the global level, relating it with the South Asia context. Yeah, so in terms of when we talk about the long-term strategy and the NDCs, it is clear that the LTS, the long-term low economic development strategy, should be an ongoing exercise in creating a vision for the future of the low emission economy, informed by the latest science and integrated into the continuous planning process. It also includes it is important to have a harmonized process that includes the other development priorities. The NDCs that were submitted recently may not be informed by the vision of the long-term strategy. So the next round of NDCs that countries would be submitting for the timeline of 2030 to 2035 should be benefited by the vision that are set by the long-term strategy. So the basic concept is how the NDC revision cycle can be informed by the long-term vision over the course of next 10 years. So that we are not locked in with the rise of temperature, and the countries are able to achieve the vision that are set in the near-term future. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the work that we continuously do with the Climate Action Tracker team, which clearly shows different projections in terms of COVID response. Yes, if we move towards the weaker green stimulus package, the initial investment would be higher, but that also means that in terms of reduction of the fossil fuel, we may not be able to achieve the target. As we move towards the stronger green stimulus packages, the investment at the initial stage will be higher, but will come with the long-term benefits. And that also helps to decrease the fossil fuel investment. There is also the chances that countries can rebound to the fossil fuel uses the economy in the current policies, which obviously will not be helpful in the longer term. So the strong climate policies plus sustained investment can provide well jobs. It can revitalize the economy and get the world in the track of 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement that countries have agreed while signing the Paris Agreement. Next slide. I'll not go through the detailed list, but this is one of the work that we did with the Climate Action Tracker, which gives a list of do's and don'ts in terms of green economic recovery. If I just take an example of the energy and electricity supply, this is an opportunity to during the economic recovery to provide a direct support for the zero emission technologies. As we move towards the low land-based transport, promote electric transport and provide incentive. But what we should not be doing at this time is providing financial incentive to those sectors which will increase the emission. So this is the time for the countries to make decision in terms of how to move ahead, whether looking at the short-term or unsustained benefits or long-term sustainable opportunities. And there are co-benefits doing this that relates to our region as well, in terms of reduction of air pollution, job creation, enhance energy security and independence. That is particularly, if I take an example of countries like Nepal and Bhutan, which are dependent on the import of petroleum product, and also enhance the access to energy and affordability, obviously help the economic growth and resilience building in the country. So the green stimulus framework so there are a timeline that has been proposed in this study in terms of how a country can take opportunity and take a stepwise approach in terms of promoting decarbonization and sustained growth prospects. Next slide. This is one of the study, the coal phase out study that we have done in the Asia and the Pacific region. I've tried to cover some of the key messages that relates to this region. In the case of South Asia and Southwest Asia, obviously as a broader message, the phasing out coal from electricity sector is a single most important step to get towards the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. All coal fire plants station must be shut down by 2040. And the latest, obviously, there are a greater leadership to be taken by OECD nations and other, but it also provides a lot of opportunities for other countries as well. And here, if we take an example of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and which also covers Turkey, with increased in coal, the emission would be more than triple. And that will increase the risk in terms of the economy, that will increase the cost of energy transition, as well as additional burden to the emerging economies. Next slide. To get more focus for the coal phase out in the South Asia and Southeast Asia context, South Asia and the Southeast Asia are among the world's most vulnerable region with very large increasing population and exposed to the high and often extreme climate risk. And already at the increase of 1 and 1.1 degrees Celsius, these countries are facing a lot of the extreme events and other climate related disasters. But South Asia and Southeast Asia also have a vast renewable energy potential, and utilizing the solar and the wind could satisfy the need of almost all the countries in the region, many times over than the investment that are required on the other side. So South and the Southeast Asia growing economy can shift from their current carbon intensive pathway to the renewable energy to fuel the economic growth that these countries are achieving, boost sustainable development, and overcome the energy poverty, while avoiding the life-threatening air pollution and other environmental degradation in the region. So there are co-benefits and the multiple benefits that countries would be experiencing while moving towards the coal phase out. Next slide. This is the work, online tools that is available in our website, the 1.5 degree National Pathway Explorer, which includes more than 60 countries, but particularly 4 countries from this region, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. I have provided the link in the website itself. The study for India is on progress. Here we explore what country needs to do to achieve the emission reduction by 2030 to achieve the 1.5 degree compatible pathways. Here you see the range of percentage, the effort that countries should require to achieve this 1.5 degree compatible pathway, and the work that needs to be done, which relates more in terms of increasing the share of renewable energy, the phase out of natural gas, the zero emission power, and declining the fossil fuel consumption. But all this come with the opportunities for these countries, which will help to decouple the emission from economic development, particularly for Bangladesh and Nepal. This is also an opportunity to graduate and become a developed country and graduate from LDCs. This also help to lessen the dependency on the energy import and improve the energy security. Obviously, these are the developing countries, and they also require support from international community to implement these activities. But by doing all these activities, the country will also be benefiting in the longer term. That's so you can explore this further in our website. Next slide. So this is the work, the focus work that we have done in Nepal in support of NDC partnership, the technical assistance, the technical support that we provided to the government of Nepal to enhance its NDC. And we did an assessment of a number of sectors, particularly electric mobility, electric cooking, which are seen as a low-hanging fruit in terms of reducing the emission, but also achieving the sustained targets and lowering the dependency from the import of fossil fuel. So here are the targets, for example, in the energy sector, which is one of the highest emission source, decreasing energy emission from the transport and cooking by 28 and 23% respectively. There are also targets related to maintaining the forest cover up to 45%. All this will reduce emission compared to the business as usual, and country has also set a net zero greenhouse gas emission target by 2050, which is being unpacked during the preparation of LTS currently. So Nepal, as one of the country with low emission, is not obliged to take such a strong target, but the narrative here is there are a lot of benefits that country have seen, and the policymakers are convinced to take these targets. My next and the final slide. Yeah, so as a takeaway message, so achieving the post-pandemic green growth in this region, based on the work that we have done, obviously it's clear, and it's clear from the presentation that we have heard before me as well, the pandemic recovery can be an opportunity to step up climate action. Many initiatives that these countries has been taking in our region, and this is informed by the long-term strategies vision for 2050 and beyond will ensure the achievement of the Paris Agreement goal. Obviously here the harmonization with other policies and action like NDCs, SDGs and NAPs are necessary, including the linkage with the SDGs and just transition will remain key. And as we give an example of coal phase out, decrease the import of fossil fuel, this clearly shows that this is an opportunity, that the green stimulus packages and their early planning and implementation will provide multiple benefits to South Asia. That relates again to reducing the air pollution, health cost, for dependency on energy, the list goes on. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manjeet, especially in on the presentation you shared on how developing countries can transition eventually to lower emission development pathway, either in the medium term, the long term, as well as providing some guidance in terms of how to do green recovery properly. So now we move on to the open discussion section, which will be picking some questions from the audience, who the ones that I posted on the Q&A board, and of course for the audience still with us, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand and I will be acknowledging you. So I'm just reviewing the questions that we have. I see to it that some of you have already answered them, provided written answers, but I would like to pose again maybe the same or similar questions to you guys, especially the ones that have been directed for a particular, for Diana, for instance, but I think it's also applicable to other panelists as well. So one of the question was in terms of the challenges and drawbacks to green recovery action. What are the challenges that what are the other challenges that you have experience of what that the countries have demonstrated on the ground? If you can provide some more concrete examples.
Yes, thank you. So one of the key challenges that we have observed, especially for LEDS and SEEDs, which are highly in-depth countries, is accessing financing for green recovery, and also accessing financing for climate finance in general. And this is related to the fact that countries normally do not have shovel-ready projects to give to investors and to ask for their support. Sometimes even the money is there, but because there are not a clear perspective on which projects can be bankable, there is no way to flow that those climate flows can mobilize downwards. So that's a key challenge that we have observed in most countries. Then, of course, we have countries that their economies are highly dependent on polluting sectors or fossil fuels, for example, Mongolia, that even if they want to implement green recovery measures or economic measures that are suitable for clean energy activities or clean activities, it is harder for them just because their economy it's already embedded into polluting activities. So it's harder for them, even though they want to. Also, we see other countries that are still struggling with immediate effects of the pandemic, and they haven't had the chance to look into the long-term opportunities to change their systems and their economies in order to generate a long-term change. So from our side, those are the key challenges. We have seen examples of countries that have done it pretty well. For example, in St. Lucia, they already have in place their NDC financing strategy and their NDC enhancement plan. So for them, developing a long-term green recovery plan was easier because they have everything stated and they have projects that they could go on and say like, okay, in order to create jobs immediately, we're going to invest in these sets of projects. So it was easier for them, and it was a good example to replicate.
Thank you, Ms. Avila. I'm just looking at the time that we have left. The organizers has graciously given us 5 more minutes for this, and maybe we can just utilize this to provide some closing statements from each of our speakers. Apologies for the restrictions in time. So why don't we start first with Ms. Ryder, and then Krishnan, and then Ms. Avila, and then Mr. Dakal.
Sure. Yes, I think there've been some great questions as well on the chat, and in particular, I think one of the key questions that was asked was on whether countries should, since climate change is going to be even worse than COVID-19, should we be spending on climate change now? And I think this is exactly the whole point of what we've been discussing today, which is both climate change and COVID-19 are key challenges. They are grey rhinos. They're slowly approaching, but we don't actually take action. And we need to find a way to do that simultaneously. And we've had lots of great ideas for how to do that from the presentations today. But fundamentally, we need to continue to exchange ideas and to put those into practice and do even more, and especially to help the poorest countries in the region to do more.
Thanks, Ms. Ryder. Mr. Krishnan.
Sure, thank you. And I think for me, the recurring theme from what I've heard, and also in relation to one of the questions about costs of low emissions pathways being higher, I think it calls for a paradigm shift across all stakeholders, governments, private sector, citizens, etc. And recognition that as we transition, there will be a set of winners and people who will lose out, and the care should be taken to ensure that people who lose out are adequately also compensated, alternate pathways identified for them. But yeah, for me, the paradigm shift across sectors, across different countries needs to be the lesson that we all learn from this.
And Ms. Avila, please.
Muted.
You're still muted.
Sorry. Yeah, so one of the questions following up with challenges, it was like, what are the challenges for from the political side, especially in developing countries? So one of the things that we discussed, it's precisely the alignment between all the strategies that a country can have, like either NDCs, SDGs, either at national level and then at subnational level. What we have seen is that what works is to start implementing green recovery measures at subnational level, because they know precisely what are the problems on the ground, and then from there building upwards up to the national level. So from the political side, of course, there are priorities in terms of economic development, first of all, before climate change still. But most governments recognize that they can tackle both challenges at the same time, and they are working towards aligning objectives. Especially in developing countries, SDGs are the guiding principles for green recovery, more than NDCs. So most of the green recovery measures are focused on creating resilience long-term and for future economic impacts like this one.
Thanks, Ms. Avila. And last but not the least, Manjeet, over to you.
Thank you. I can add in terms of the challenges. Maybe just two more challenges. One, obviously the sensitization at the political level, because unless that's how the policies are driven in most of the context. So unless there is a certain level of awareness, and how that can be done, I think it's about the right messaging that Diana also highlighted earlier in terms of the economic benefits of job creation, which are the political agenda of the political party during the election, and also clearly messaging them about the differences between the short-term immediate response and the long-term benefits. The second would be, I think, the lack of assessments in many of the country, where a think tank organization working with the government or independently can come up with the assessment how countries would be benefiting by implementing such policies. Yeah, thank you.
And with that, we have come to the end of the discussion part of this session. I would like to thank the presenters again for their valuable insights, and apologies for running over time to our organizers. I will now pass the floor back to our Mr. Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Dio, and thanks a lot to all the speakers for bringing their ideas and actual scenarios in various countries. I think that will be good, and I'm so happy to hear the challenges, and how to tackle the challenges also. I think that's an important point. We as an ICLEI and Asia LEDS partnership, we are very keen to work with all the national governments in Asia Pacific region at least, to make sure to overcome all the challenges with the long-term strategies. So that I'm completely agree that I think we need to work on the pandemic. That is important, immediate concern, but climate change is also more important than just the pandemic, I think. Combined strategies, I think some of the speakers are talking about combined procedures and combined attacking both climate change as well as pandemic, I think at the same time is also very much should be on the cards of the national governments. Thanks again to each and every one of you for contributing to this particular session. I know that we have a lot of questions left out in the chat box also, and maybe we will come back to the speakers if other questions come and ask you through emails. Maybe if you can provide your answers so that we can go back to the audience, whoever is asking these questions. So if that is okay with all of you, we will come back. Our team will come back to all of you on this particular point also. So with this, I think I just want to close it, but maybe before we close, if it is okay with all of you, we will have a group photo for our records. And request maybe others also if they want to open up their videos and ask my team to take a group photo with all the speakers and other participants. I'll just count maybe 3, 2, 1, and team can take a clip. This is the only way we can do it at this time because we are not in person. So 3, 2, 1. Please smile. Thank you. One more time, maybe Sashi, please give a hands up once you click it. 3, 2, 1.
Yes, got it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot to all of you once again, and thanks for taking your time out from your busy schedules. And we are sorry, 14 minutes delay of this session. But I also want to remind the participants and the speakers, if you have time, we have a session coming up at 2:30 Bangkok time. And 1 o'clock of India time on aligning NDCs and long-term low emission development strategies as the next session in the ALP forum. So request you, if your time permits, please join us. And I just want to thank each and everyone again, all the participants, and the recording will be available after this. And if you have any more questions to the speakers or to the ALP, please come back to us on that. So once again, Mr. Dio, Mr. Manjit, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Deepak, and Ms. Diana, thank you. Thanks for all of your time, and all the best, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.